Have you ever built your entire future around one person, only to have it destroyed in a single heartbeat? We like to think love is honest, but in the glittering ballrooms of 19th century London, the truth was often the first casualty. Today's story follows Lady Genevieve Fairchild, a woman who gave her heart to a golden boy, only to overhear him shattering it into pieces for the amusement of his friends. But don't click away, because her despair led to a secret offer from the most dangerous duke in England. This is a story of betrayal, redemption, and a cold, calculating revenge that turned into a burning passion. You won't believe how this ends. The year was 1814, and the London season was suffocating. For Lady Genevieve Fairchild, the air inside the Wetherby mansion at 12 Grosvenor Square felt particularly thin, though perhaps that was merely the corset or the crushing weight of her own expectations. Genevieve, Jenna to her family, was 21. By the ruthless standards of the ton, she was already bordering on spinsterhood. She possessed a quiet beauty, the kind often overlooked in favor of diamond-bright debutantes. Her hair was the color of roasted chestnuts, and her eyes were a soft, intelligent grey, but she lacked the dowry to make men look twice, except for one man. Or so she believed. Lord Benedict Crouch, the future Earl of Morcott, had been her constant correspondent during his military service in the peninsula. Their letters had been her lifeline. He wrote of the harsh sun in Spain. She wrote of the rainy monotony of her father's crumbling estate in Derbyshire. When he returned a hero, bronzed and dashing, he had sought her out immediately. Tonight was the night. He had hinted at it. "Meet me in the library, Jenna, away from the noise. I have a question only you can answer." Her heart hammered a frantic rhythm against her ribs as she slipped away from the crowded ballroom. The music, a lively reel, faded as she hurried down the velvet-carpeted corridor. She reached the heavy oak doors of the library. They were slightly ajar. She raised her hand to push them open, a smile trembling on her lips, when a voice stopped her. It was a voice she knew better than her own. "Oh, come now, Benedict." A slur of laughter followed. It was Sir Thomas Avery, a man known for his gambling debts and loose tongue. "You cannot be serious. The Fairchild girl? She's as plain as a parish sermon." Genevieve froze. Her hand hovered over the wood. "Needs must, Thomas," Benedict's voice replied. It wasn't the warm, tender baritone she knew. It was cold, drawling, and steeped in boredom. "My father has tightened the purse strings. The Fairchild estate borders Morcott land. It's a strategic acquisition, nothing more. A man has to eat, and if I have to choke down a dry crust of bread to get to the feast, so be it." "Ah, dry crust!" Another man roared with laughter. "God, you're a martyr, Crouch. But surely she expects affection. The girl looks at you like you hung the moon." "That's the beauty of it," Benedict said, and Genevieve could practically hear the smirk in his voice. "She is so desperate for love, so pathetic in her adoration, that I won't have to do much. A few kind words, a touch on the hand, and she'll be grateful for the scraps. I'll install her in the country, breed an heir, and spend my time in London with eager widows who actually know how to please a man." The world tilted on its axis. The floor beneath Genevieve's satin slippers seemed to liquefy. Pathetic. Strategic acquisition. Dry crust. Every letter she had cherished, every secret hope she had nurtured, was incinerated in seconds. He didn't love her. He didn't even respect her. He saw her as a piece of livestock to be merged with his land. A sob rose in her throat, violent and sharp. She clamped a hand over her mouth, terrified they would hear her. She turned to flee, blinding tears blurring her vision. She ran. She didn't care about decorum. She ran back down the corridor, past the confused footman, and burst out into the cool night air of the terrace. She couldn't breathe. The corset was a vice. The betrayal was a dagger. She stumbled toward the stone balustrade, gasping for air, her entire body shaking. "Careful, my lady!" A deep, gravelly voice emerged from the shadows of a pillar. "The drop is significant, and the pavement is unforgiving." Genevieve whipped around, dashing tears from her cheeks. Standing in the darkness, illuminated only by the ember of a cheroot, was a mountain of a man. Casey Sterling, the Duke of Westcott. Every rumour she had ever heard about him rushed to the forefront of her mind. They called him the Wolf of Westcott. He was immensely wealthy, brutally reclusive, and carried a scar that ran from his temple to his jaw, a souvenir, it was said, of a duel fought over a woman he later ruined. "Your Grace," she choked out, dipping into a clumsy curtsy. I apologize. I did not see you." He stepped into the moonlight. He was terrifying. Tall, broad-shouldered, with eyes as black as obsidian, and that jagged scar disrupting the harsh lines of his face. He looked at her not with pity, but with a clinical, intense curiosity. "You were listening at the library door," he stated. It wasn't a question. Genevieve went pale. I was in the alcove across the hall," Casey said, taking a drag of his smoke. "I heard Crouch. He has a carrying voice for a man with such a small soul." Genevieve felt the humiliation burn her skin. "Please, do not tell anyone. If they know I was rejected before I was even proposed to. If they know I was so foolish." "Foolish?" Casey flicked the ash away. "You weren't foolish. You were deceived. There is a difference." He stepped closer, towering over her. "The question is, Lady Genevieve, now that you know the truth, what are you going to do about it?" Genevieve stared at the Duke. I can do nothing. I must leave. I must return to Derbyshire and hide my face." "And let him win?" Casey tilted his head. "Let him laugh with his friends about how the dry crust ran away? If you leave now, you confirm everything he said. You become the pathetic creature he described." His words were harsh, but they acted like smelling salts. They woke her up. "What choice do I have?" she whispered. "He is the future Earl. I am nobody." "You are a woman who knows his secret," Casey said softly. "He is broke. He is desperate. And you?" He looked her up and down, his dark eyes lingering on her tear-stained face. "You are in need of a shield." Before she could ask what he meant, the terrace doors opened. Jenna, are you out here?" It was Benedict. He sounded so worried, so perfect. A minute ago, that voice would have made her heart soar. Now, it made her bile rise. Benedict stepped onto the terrace, spotting her. He didn't see the Duke in the shadows immediately. "Oh, my dear, there you are. I've been looking everywhere. You ran off so suddenly." He approached her, reaching for her hands. "I was worried you were unwell. I have been waiting all evening to ask you something important." He was going to do it. He was going to propose right now to secure his acquisition. Genevieve trembled. She wanted to scream. Lady Genevieve was just feeling faint. Casey's voice cut through the air like a whip crack. Benedict jumped, spinning around. His charming mask slipped for a fraction of a second, revealing annoyance before smoothing back into deference. "Your Grace, I didn't realize you were occupied." "I found her ladyship in distress," Casey lied smoothly, stepping out of the shadows to stand beside Genevieve. The physical difference between the two men was stark. Benedict was pretty and polished. Casey was raw power and darkness. "Thank you, Westcott," Benedict said stiffly. "I can take care of her now. Jenna, come." He reached for her again, a possessive glint in his eye. Genevieve looked at Benedict's hand, the hand that would take her money and pat her head like a dog. Then she looked at Casey. The Duke's face was unreadable, but his presence was a fortress. "Actually," Genevieve said, her voice shaking but louder than she expected, "I think I should like to stay here a moment longer. The air is clearing my head. Benedict's smile tightened. Jenna, don't be silly. People will talk if you are out here, alone with His Grace. Let them talk, Casey rumbled. He turned his black eyes to Genevieve. I was just about to make Lady Genevieve an offer. Benedict laughed nervously. An offer? For what? A dance? Casey ignored him. He looked strictly at Genevieve. I am in need of a wife, Lady Genevieve. My estate is vast, my fortune is burdensome, and I require a duchess who possesses intelligence and resilience. I have no patience for the vapid games of the court. I heard you in the library hall, not just weeping, but holding your silence. You have dignity. The silence on the terrace was deafening. Benedict's mouth dropped open. You are proposing to her, Benedict sputtered. But she is what, Crouch? Casey challenged, his voice dropping an octave, dangerous and low. Plain? Pathetic? Or is she perhaps too good for a fortune hunter disguised as a gentleman? Benedict flushed a violent red. He looked from the scarred Duke to the trembling Genevieve. He knew he couldn't win a duel of words or swords with the Wolf of Westcott. You are making a mistake, Jenna, Benedict hissed, his facade crumbling entirely. He's a monster. Ask anyone. I would rather a monster who speaks the truth, Genevieve said, finding a reserve of steel in her spine she didn't know existed, than a prince who speaks lies. Benedict sneered, turned on his heel, and stormed back inside. Genevieve let out a breath she felt she'd been holding for a lifetime. Her knees gave way, and Casey caught her by the elbow, steadying her. Breathe, he commanded. Did you mean it? She asked, looking up at him. Or was that just to save me? I never say things I do not mean, Lady Genevieve. I need a wife. You need protection from the humiliation that man intended for you. He paused, his expression guarding a deep, hidden pain. It would be a marriage of convenience. I require an heir and someone to manage my household. You would have access to my fortune, my protection, and your freedom. I ask for no affection, and I offer none. My heart. He touched his chest lightly. That organ died a long time ago, but I offer you my name. It was a cold offer, a business deal, but compared to the false warmth Benedict had offered, it felt incredibly honest. Yes, Genevieve whispered. I accept. The wedding was a whirlwind, shocking the ton to its core. The plain Genevieve Fairchild had snagged the most eligible, if terrifying, bachelor in England. The gossip rags were vicious, speculating that she must have bewitched him or that she was carrying a child. Benedict spread rumors that she was unstable, trying to salvage his own pride. Genevieve ignored them all. She was now the Duchess of Westcott. After the ceremony, they travelled immediately to his ancestral seat, Blackwood Manor, in the wild moors of Yorkshire. It was a fitting home for the wolf, imposing, dark stone, battered by wind and rain, yet undeniably majestic. The carriage ride had been mostly silent. Casey read correspondence, and Genevieve stared out the window, wondering if she had traded a broken heart for a gilded cage. When they arrived, the staff was lined up, trembling slightly. Casey was a demanding master. But he was fair. You are mistress here, Casey told her in the grand foyer. Change what you like. Order what you wish. The east wing, however, is mine. You are not to disturb me there, and you are never to enter the tower room at the end of that hall. Is that understood? The classic Bluebeard warning. Genevieve felt a chill. I understand. For the first month, they lived separate lives. Casey vanished into his study, or rode out onto the moors for hours. Genevieve threw herself into managing the estate. She found the accounts were in disarray, not from lack of money, but from neglect. She organized the kitchens, repaired the tenant cottages, and even started a garden. She began to see cracks in the Duke's monstrous reputation. She saw him stop to help a tenant farmer fix a broken wagon wheel in the pouring rain, ruining his fine coat. She saw him subtly slip coins to a widow in the village without waiting for thanks. He was not cruel. He was lonely, and he was hiding something. One evening, a storm raged outside, battering the windows of the manor. Genevieve sat in the drawing room, reading. Casey entered, looking exhausted. He poured himself a brandy. "You have done well with the accounts," he said gruffly, not looking at her. "The steward tells me we have saved £200 this month." "Efficiency is its own reward," she replied, mimicking his dry tone. He actually chuckled, a rusty, low sound. He turned to look at her, and for the first time, the darkness in his eyes seemed to lift slightly. "You are not what I expected, Genevieve. I expected you to cower." "I cowered once, in a library doorway," she said, meeting his gaze. "I decided I didn't like the feeling." He stared at her, an intense heat building between them. He took a step closer, and for a moment, she thought he might kiss her. The air crackled with unspoken tension. Suddenly, a bell rang, a frantic, high-pitched bell from the servants' quarters. Casey stiffened. His face went ashen. "Excuse me." He set the glass down and ran, actually ran, toward the forbidden East Wing. Genevieve stood there, her heart pounding. The rumors about the scarred Duke flooded back. A mad wife locked in the attic. A dark ritual. She knew she had promised not to follow. But she was his wife, and the look of sheer terror on his face wasn't for himself. It was fear for someone else. She grabbed a candelabra and followed him. The East Wing was cold and dusty, except for the path Casey had cleared. She reached the heavy door at the end of the hall. The tower room, it was slightly ajar. She heard a sound that stopped her cold. Not a scream, not a monster. It was a cough, a wet, rattling, child's cough. "Shh, easy now, Leo. I'm here. It was Casey's voice, but it was unrecognizable. It was tender, desperate, and overflowing with love. Genevieve pushed the door open. The room was warm, filled with toys and books. In a large four-poster bed sat a small boy, perhaps 6 years old, frail and pale, his skin almost translucent. Casey was sitting on the edge of the bed, holding the boy upright so he could breathe, rubbing his back with gentle, massive hands. Genevieve gasped. Casey's head snapped up. His eyes blazed with fury and fear. He stood up, shielding the boy with his body. "I told you never to come here," he roared, a sound that shook the walls. "Casey," she whispered, stepping into the room. "Who is he? Get out." "No," she said firmly. She set the candle down. She looked at the boy, who was looking at her with wide, fearful eyes that were the exact same shade of obsidian black as the Duke's. "He is your son," she stated. Casey slumped, the fight draining out of him. "He is my sin," he rasped, "and my life. And if the world finds out about him, they will destroy him." The silence in the tower room was broken only by the boy's ragged breathing and the wind howling against the stone walls. Casey stood like a cornered animal, his body tense, ready to physically remove Genevieve from the room if necessary. But Genevieve did not back away. She did not look at the child with the disdain the ton reserved for base-born children. She looked at him with the practical soft eyes of a woman who had spent years nursing her own hypochondriac father. She moved past Casey. "He is burning up," she said, her voice calm, though her hands trembled slightly as she touched the boy's forehead. "The fire is too hot, Casey. The air is dry. It's making his chest tight." Casey blinked, the aggression faltering. "The doctor said, 'The doctor is an old fool if he thinks stifling a child in a dusty tower is a cure,'" she snapped gently. She went to the bedside table, poured a glass of water, and held it to the boy's lips. "Drink, Leo." Slowly. The boy, Leo, looked up at her over the rim of the glass. He had his father's dark curls, but a softness in his features that was entirely his own. He drank, his coughing subsiding into a wheeze. "Who are you?" Leo whispered, his voice small. "I am Genevieve," she said, smoothing the hair back from his damp forehead. "I am your father's friend, and I am going to help you breathe." Casey watched, stunned. He had expected screaming. He had expected her to pack her trunks and leave, citing the breach of contract. A duchess didn't raise a bastard. "Why?" Casey asked, his voice rough as he stepped closer. "Why are you doing this?" Genevieve turned to him. "Because he is a child, Casey, and he is yours." Later that night, after Leo had fallen into a fitful sleep, Casey and Genevieve sat by the dying embers of the fire in the nursery. The barrier between them had shattered. "His mother," Casey began, staring into the flames, "was not a lady of the court. Her name was Marguerite. She was a governess I met in Vienna during my grand tour. She was brilliant, kind, and entirely unsuitable for the Duke of Westcott." He poured himself a drink from a flask, his hands shaking. "I married her," he confessed. Genevieve's eyes widened. You are a widower?" "In the eyes of God, yes. But in the eyes of English law, it is complicated. We married in a small chapel in the Austrian Alps. But when we tried to return to England, the carriage—" He touched the scar on his face, his expression twisting in agony. "It wasn't a duel, Jenna. It was bandits. They attacked our carriage near the border. I fought them off, but the carriage overturned. Marguerite." He couldn't finish the sentence. The silence told the rest of the tragic story. "She died giving birth to Leo amidst the wreckage," he whispered. "I survived, scarred and broken, with a newborn infant. The marriage certificate was lost in the chaos. The priest who married us died of typhus a month later. I had no proof. To the world, Leo is a bastard. If I tried to claim him as my heir without proof, the crown would intervene. My cousin, a man who would sell his own mother for a sovereign, would challenge the succession. He would have Leo declared a fraud and cast out. So you hid him," Genevieve realized. "To protect him? I brought him here. I told the world I was a recluse because I hated society. The truth is, I couldn't leave him. He has weak lungs. The London smog would kill him. I have spent every penny I have on doctors, tutors, and treatments." He looked at her, his eyes pleading. "He is my life, Genevieve. I didn't tell you because I couldn't risk you using him against me. I thought you would be like the others." Genevieve reached out and took his large, scarred hand in hers. "You foolish man," she said softly. "You thought I would hate a child because of a piece of paper? I know what it is to be judged for what you lack, Casey. Benedict judged me for my lack of fortune. I will not judge Leo for his lack of a title." Casey looked at their joined hands. He turned his palm up and squeezed her fingers. "I offered you a marriage of convenience," he murmured. "I did not expect this." "Neither did I," she admitted. "But we are in this together now. Leo needs fresh air. He needs a mother, not a nursemaid. And you, Your Grace, need to stop haunting your own house like a ghost." For the first time since the night on the terrace, the Wolf of Westcott didn't look frightening. He looked like a man who had finally found sanctuary. Months passed, and Blackwood Manor underwent a transformation. It was gradual at first. The heavy velvet drapes that had turned the house into a tomb were pulled back, letting the crisp Yorkshire sunlight flood the hallways. The dust was swept away, and the sound of silence was replaced by something far more dangerous: laughter. Genevieve had moved Leo from the tower room to a bright, airy suite overlooking the gardens. Under her care, and her strict orders for fresh air and nutritious broths, the boy began to thrive. He gained weight. The color returned to his cheeks. And as the boy healed, so did the father. Casey no longer vanished for days. He began to join Genevieve and Leo for picnics on the edge of the moors. One golden afternoon in July, Genevieve sat on a checkered blanket, watching Casey teach Leo how to fly a kite. The Duke was laughing. It was a rich, booming sound that startled the birds from the trees. He was running, his long coat flapping behind him, as Leo squealed with delight, chasing the paper bird in the sky. Genevieve felt a warmth spread through her chest that had nothing to do with the sun. She had married him for protection. She had stayed for duty. But now... "He looks happy," a voice said. Genevieve looked up. It was Mrs. Gable, the housekeeper, holding a tray of tea. "He is happy," Genevieve replied. "I haven't seen the master smile since before Vienna," Mrs. Gable said, wiping a tear from her eye. "You have performed a miracle, Your Grace." It felt like a miracle. But miracles are fragile things. The idyll was shattered 2 weeks later. A carriage rolled up the long gravel drive of Blackwood Manor. It bore the crest of the Crouch family. Genevieve was in the garden, cutting roses, when the footman announced the visitor. "Lord Benedict Crouch and Sir Thomas Avery, Your Grace." The blood drained from her face. She dropped her basket. "Here? Why?" "They claim they were travelling north for a hunting party and wished to pay their respects to the Duke and Duchess." It was a lie. Benedict was sniffing around. "Where is the Duke?" she asked frantically. "He is in the library, Your Grace." "And Leo?" "Master Leo is in the stables with the grooms." "Keep him there," she ordered. "On no account is Lord Benedict to see the child. Do you understand?" Genevieve smoothed her dress, steeled her nerves, and walked into the drawing room. Benedict stood by the fireplace, looking as handsome and polished as ever, though his coat was slightly frayed at the cuffs, a sign that his debts were catching up with him. Sir Thomas, his sycophantic friend, stood by the window. "Jenna!" Benedict exclaimed, turning with a bright, fake smile. He moved to kiss her hand. "My God, look at you. You look robust. Country life suits you." He meant it as an insult, implying she had gained weight or looked rustic, but Genevieve didn't flinch. "Lord Benedict," she said coolly, withdrawing her hand. "To what do we owe the pleasure? We are quite far off the beaten path." "Oh, just passing through." Benedict waved a hand dismissively. "I must admit, curiosity got the better of me. The ton is rife with rumours. They say the Duke keeps you locked away like a prisoner. I wanted to ensure my dear old friend was safe." "I am perfectly safe and very happy," Genevieve said. "Your concern is touching, though unnecessary." The door opened, and Casey entered. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. He loomed over Benedict, his scar looking particularly jagged in the afternoon light. "Crouch," Casey growled. "You have 5 minutes to state your business and remove yourself from my land." Benedict chuckled nervously, stepping back. "Hospitality as warm as ever, Westcott. We just needed a place to water the horses." "The stables are that way," Casey pointed to the door. "Actually," Sir Thomas piped up from the window, "I was admiring your grounds. You have a magnificent estate, Duke, though I must ask, who is the young lad riding the pony in the paddock?" Genevieve's heart stopped. The stables were visible from the window. Casey went rigid. "The son of a groom," he lied instantly. "A groom's son?" Benedict walked to the window, squinting. "Dressed in velvet breeches, and riding a purebred pony? My, you treat your servants well." Benedict turned back, his eyes gleaming with a predatory light. He had found the loose thread. "He looks remarkably like you, Westcott," Benedict said softly. "Same black hair. Same bearing." "Leave," Casey said, his voice low and deadly. He took a step toward Benedict, his hands balling into fists. Of course," Benedict said, raising his hands in mock surrender. "We are going. But you know, Westcott, the legitimacy of a line is a serious matter. If one were to harbour unreported assets. Well, it would be a scandal. Perhaps even treason if one were to try to pass off a bastard as a peer. He let the threat hang in the air. He didn't know the whole truth, but he knew enough to destroy them. Benedict bowed to Genevieve. "Until we meet again, Duchess. I have a feeling we shall be speaking very soon." As soon as the carriage rattled away, Casey turned to Genevieve. The colour was gone from his face. "He knows," Casey rasped. "He suspects," Genevieve corrected, her mind racing. "He is fishing for money, Casey. He is broke. He wants to blackmail you. If he digs, he will find out there is no marriage certificate for Marguerite." Casey paced the room, running a hand through his hair. "He will write to the cousin. He will bring the Lunacy Commission down on us to check my sanity for raising a bastard in the manor. They will take Leo away to a workhouse." "No," Genevieve said firmly. "They will!" Casey roared, smashing his fist onto the table. "I cannot protect him from the law, Genevieve. I have money, but I do not have the proof." "Then we get the proof," Genevieve said. Casey stopped. "What?" "You said the certificate was lost in the wreckage. You said the priest died." Genevieve walked over to him, grabbing his lapels and forcing him to look at her. "But you also said you were in the Austrian Alps. The church keeps records, Casey. Even if the priest died, there is a registry. There has to be a duplicate." "The chapel was in a village that was buried by a landslide 2 years ago," Casey said hopelessly. "It is gone." "Then there are witnesses," she insisted. "The innkeeper? The midwife?" "Genevieve, it is hopeless. I have tried." "You tried as a grieving, broken man hiding a baby," she said fiercely. "You did not try as a team. We are going to Vienna, Casey." "Vienna?" "Benedict thinks he has you cornered. He thinks you will pay him to keep quiet. We will stall him. We will pay him his hush money for 1 month, and in that month we will go to Austria, and we will find the proof that Leo is your legitimate heir. We will not hide any more." Casey stared at her. He saw the fire in her eyes, the same fire he had seen that night on the terrace when she chose him over Benedict. He grabbed her face in his hands and kissed her. It wasn't a gentle kiss. It was desperate, consuming, and filled with a terrifying amount of hope. "You would do this?" he asked, pulling back, his forehead resting against hers. "You would travel across a continent, risk scandal, risk your reputation for a boy who is not yours." "He is mine," Genevieve whispered. "He is ours, and I will not let that man win." The plan was a gamble, built on desperation and gold. Casey liquidated a significant portion of his mother's jewelry to pay Benedict a good-faith installment, enough to silence him for 3 weeks. Benedict, arrogant and believing he had successfully cowed the wolf, took the money with a smirk, promising to keep the unfortunate secret of the bastard child quiet for now. He did not know that the moment his carriage left the drive, Casey and Genevieve were packing. "We cannot take Leo," Casey said, his voice tight as he knelt by the sleeping boy's bed. "It was 3 in the morning. The road is too dangerous. The pace will be grueling." "Mrs. Gable will guard him with her life," Genevieve whispered, placing a hand on Casey's shoulder. "And I have instructed the gamekeeper to patrol the grounds. No one gets in." Casey kissed his son's forehead, then stood, his face hardening into the mask of the Duke. "Then let us ride." The journey was a nightmare of exhaustion. They took a packet boat across the channel during a gale that churned the grey water into frothing peaks. Genevieve, usually composed, was violently ill. Casey, the man who had claimed to have a dead heart, sat by her bunk for 12 hours, holding a basin and wiping her face with a cool cloth, murmuring comforts in a mix of English and German. "You should rest," she murmured weakly, shivering. "I will rest when we have the paper," he replied, kissing her hand. "You are strong, Jenna. Stronger than any soldier I commanded." They landed in Calais and purchased a light, fast carriage. They drove through France and into the German states, stopping only to change horses. They slept in the carriage, their bodies jostled against each other, exhaustion stripping away the last remnants of formality. One night, in a roadside inn near Munich, the exhaustion overtook them. There was only one room available. Casey barred the door. Genevieve sat on the edge of the narrow straw mattress, dusting the road grit from her skirts. Casey poured 2 cups of wine. "We are 3 days from the mountains," he said, handing her a cup. He looked weary, the scar on his face standing out starkly against his pale skin. "We will make it," Genevieve said. She took the cup, their fingers brushing. Casey looked at her, really looked at her, in the dim candlelight. "Why are you doing this, Jenna? You could have stayed in England. You could have denounced me when Benedict arrived. You could have been free of this mess." "I told you," she said, setting the cup down and standing to face him. "I am your wife, and I love Leo." She took a step closer, her heart hammering, and I have grown to love his father. Casey went still. "Do not say that unless you mean it. I am a scarred, broken man." "You are the most whole man I have ever known," she whispered. She reached up, tracing the line of his scar with her thumb. "Benedict wanted a trophy. I wanted a partner. I found one." Casey let out a low groan and pulled her into his arms. The kiss was not like the one in the library. It was a collision of souls. There, in a dusty inn, halfway across the world, the marriage of convenience burned to ash, replaced by a passion that had been smouldering since the night on the terrace. They arrived in the Austrian Alps 4 days later. The village of St. Johann was gone, buried under tons of rock and earth from the landslide Casey had described. It was a graveyard of nature. Genevieve saw the despair in Casey's eyes as he stared at the rubble. "It's over," he breathed. The church stood right there. "The abbey," Genevieve said, pointing to a stone structure perched high on the opposite ridge, untouched by the slide. "You said the priest died of typhus after the slide. If the village was destroyed, where did the survivors go? Where were the sick tended to?" Hope, fragile and sharp, returned to Casey's eyes. "The Abbey of Heiligenkreuz." They urged their horses up the steep, winding path. The monks were surprised to receive an English duke and duchess, but the abbot, a withered man with kind eyes, listened to their plea. "Records from St. Johann?" the abbot mused. "Yes. We took in the refugees. We salvaged what we could from the church vestry before the mud took the rest. But it is a chaotic pile. We have not had the time to sort it." "Let us look," Casey begged. "Please." They spent 2 days in the crypt of the abbey, surrounded by stacks of water-damaged books and loose parchments. The dust was thick. The air was cold. On the afternoon of the second day, Genevieve let out a sharp cry. "Casey!" He was at her side in an instant. She was holding a leather-bound ledger, stained with mould, but legible. She pointed to an entry dated November 1809. "Casey Sterling, Duke of Westcott, to Marguerite Weber. Witnessed by Father Thomas and mountainous guide Hans Gruber." It was there. Indisputable proof. "We have it," Casey choked out, his hands shaking as he touched the ink. "He is legitimate. He is my heir." "We must go," Genevieve said, closing the book and clutching it to her chest. "We must get this to London before Benedict returns to Blackwood." They thanked the monks, leaving a donation large enough to repair the abbey roof, and rushed back to their carriage. But as they descended the mountain road, a fallen tree blocked the path. Casey pulled the horses to a halt. "Stay inside," he ordered, reaching for the pistol he kept under the seat. He stepped out into the mist. "Who is there?" From the trees emerged 3 men. They were not bandits. They were too well armed. And leading them was a man Genevieve recognized from London, a shadowy figure often seen at the gaming hells Benedict frequented. Lord Benedict sends his regards, the man sneered, raising a musket. He thought you might try something foolish like this. He prefers the secret to remain unverifiable. Casey didn't hesitate. He fired. The ensuing chaos was a blur of violence. Casey was a war hero, a man who had survived the peninsula and the carriage wreck. He fought with the ferocity of a wolf defending its cub. He took a bullet to the shoulder but didn't stop, charging the gunman and knocking him over the precipice. Genevieve screamed as another man lunged for the carriage door. She swung the heavy ledger with all her might, striking him in the face, sending him reeling back long enough for Casey to subdue him. When the silence returned, the attackers had fled or fallen. Casey stood panting, blood soaking his white shirt. "Casey!" Genevieve scrambled out, tearing her petticoat to bind his wound. "I'm fine," he gritted out, wincing. "It's a flesh wound, but we cannot stop. If Benedict sent men here, he knows we are coming. He will move against Leo." He looked at her, his eyes blazing. "Drive the carriage, Jenna. I can shoot, but I cannot hold the reins." And so, the Lady Genevieve Fairchild, once the wallflower of the London ballrooms, took the reins of a 4-horse phaeton and drove them out of the Alps, carrying the future of the House of Westcott in her lap. The road back to England was a trial of endurance that would have broken lesser people. It was a blur of grey, churning seas and endless rattling carriage rides that shook their bones. Casey, despite the untreated bullet wound in his shoulder, refused to rest for more than a few hours at a time. The heat of infection threatened him, flushed and burning against his skin, but the fever of his fury kept him lucid. He was a man possessed, driven by a singular, consuming purpose: to protect the legacy of his son and the honor of the woman who had saved him. Genevieve, for her part, had undergone a transformation so profound she was barely recognizable as the woman who had left. The quiet, overlooked wallflower of the London ballrooms was gone. In her place sat a woman who had driven a 4-horse phaeton through a mountain ambush, who had tended to a gruesome gunshot wound with steady, blood-stained hands, and who now held the future of a dukedom in her lap, wrapped securely in oilcloth and leather. She watched the horizon with eyes that had seen violence and victory, her resolve as hardened as the steel of the carriage wheels. They arrived in London on the evening of the grand midsummer ball. The timing could not have been more poetic, nor more dangerous. The city was stiflingly hot, the air thick with the smell of horse manure, coal smoke, and roasting chestnuts. But inside the gilded gates of Carlton House, the atmosphere was perfumed, cool, and rarefied. This was the Prince Regent's own affair, the absolute pinnacle of the social season, where the most powerful men and women in the British Empire gathered to gossip, drink, and destroy reputations with a whisper. Lord Benedict Crouch was in his element. He stood near the centre of the ballroom, a glass of vintage champagne in hand, holding court beneath a crystal chandelier that cost more than most men earned in a lifetime. He looked every inch the grieving friend, the tragic hero of his own fabricated story. His cravat was tied to intricate perfection, his coat was of the finest cut, and his expression was a carefully practiced mask of sombre, dignified resignation. "It is a tragedy, truly, a loss that sits heavy on my heart," Benedict was saying to a circle of rapt listeners, which included the influential Lady Jersey and several high-ranking members of the House of Lords. He sighed, a sound that seemed to carry the weight of the world, perfectly calibrated to elicit sympathy. "I did everything I could to help him. But Westcott, poor tortured Casey, he has always been unstable. The war, you know, the peninsula. It broke something in him that never healed." "And the rumours?" Lady Jersey asked, her fan fluttering like a hummingbird's wing, her eyes bright with the hunger for scandal. "About a child." Benedict lowered his voice, leaning in as if sharing a state secret, creating an intimate conspiracy with his audience. Worse than rumors, I'm afraid. Delusions. Deep, dangerous delusions. He has been hiding a base-born child in the attic of Blackwood Manor, convinced the boy is his legitimate heir. I tried to reason with him, to save him from the inevitable scandal, but he fled. He dragged that poor Fairchild girl, Lady Genevieve, into his madness. I fear for her safety. Indeed, I have received word from the continent that they were lost in the Alps, a terrible accident on a mountain pass. He paused to let the horror sink in, taking a slow, contemplative sip of his champagne, watching the shock ripple through the group. I shall, of course, have to petition the Crown, Benedict continued, his voice heavy with false reluctance. With Casey gone, and no legitimate heir to the title, the Westcott estates must be managed. It is a burden I do not wish for, but as his closest friend and nearest male relative, I must do my duty to the line. A noble sacrifice, a lord murmured sympathetically, nodding gravely. Indeed, Benedict nodded, looking appropriately pained. I only hope that... Madness? The single word cut through the murmur of the crowd like a cannon blast. It was not a shout, but a deep, resonant boom that vibrated against the walls, commanding instant silence. The orchestra faltered and stopped. The chatter died in throats. All heads turned toward the grand archway of the entrance hall. Standing there, framed by the golden light of the flambeau, was a vision that would be talked about in London society for a century. Casey Stirling, the Duke of Westcott, looked nothing like the polished gentleman in the room. He was still wearing his travelling clothes, a long, heavy coat stained with the dust of 3 countries and the grime of the road. His boots were caked with dried mud. His left arm was bound in a crude sling made from strips of white petticoat, the fabric stark against his dark coat, stained with a blooming flower of fresh, bright red blood. His face was gaunt, his skin pale from blood loss, and the jagged scar that bisected his cheek stood out in violent relief. But his eyes were burning with a cold, terrifying fire that froze the blood of anyone who met his gaze, and beside him stood Genevieve. She was no longer the plain girl in the corner. She wore a crumpled travelling dress, her hair was wind-blown and escaping its pins, and there were dark circles of exhaustion bruised under her eyes. But she stood with her chin high, her hand gripping Casey's good arm, radiating a strength and regality that made the diamond-clad debutantes shrink back in shame. She carried a leather-bound book against her chest like a shield, her knuckles white around it. "Casey!" Benedict's voice cracked, high and thin. The champagne glass slipped from his numb fingers and shattered on the parquet floor, the sound echoing like a gunshot in the profound silence. You are supposed to be dead?" Casey finished the sentence for him, his voice scraping like gravel. He took a slow, limping step into the room. The crowd parted instantly, creating a wide berth for the wolf and his mate, terrified by the raw violence radiating from him. "I apologize for the disappointment, Crouch. It seems your men were not as competent as you hoped." A collective gasp rippled through the room like a wave. "Men?" someone whispered. "What does he mean?" Benedict's face drained of color, leaving him looking like a corpse. He looked around wildly, seeing the confusion and suspicion dawning on the faces of his peers. He had to salvage this. He had to destroy them now, before they could speak the truth. "This man is unwell," Benedict shouted, pointing a trembling finger at Casey. Panic made his voice shrill and desperate. "Look at him! He is deranged! He has been dragging his wife across Europe on a chase for phantoms. He has a bastard child he claims is a marquis. Someone call the guards. He is a danger to the prince." "I have been raising my son," Casey said, his voice calm, steady, and carrying to the very back of the vaulted hall. He did not shout. He did not need to. The authority in his tone was absolute. "Leopold Sterling, the Marquis of Blackwood, and I have returned to claim his place among his peers." "A lie!" Benedict screamed, abandoning all decorum, sweat flying from his brow. "The mother was a whore, a camp follower. There was no marriage. You have no proof. It is a fraud." Genevieve stepped forward then. She released Casey's arm and walked into the center of the room, alone. She looked Benedict in the eye, and for the first time he saw the steel that lay beneath her quiet exterior. "We do not traffic in lies, Lord Benedict," she said, her voice clear and ringing like a bell in the frosty air. "That is your trade." She lifted the heavy, water-stained ledger high for all to see. "This is the parish registry from the Church of St. Johann in the Austrian Alps," she announced to the room. "It was recovered from the Abbey of Heiligenkreuz, where it was kept safe after the landslide destroyed the village. It is signed by the presiding priest, Father Thomas, and witnessed by the guide, Hans Gruber." She turned from Benedict and walked directly toward the dais at the far end of the room, where the Prince Regent sat, watching the unfolding drama with grotesque fascination. He loved nothing more than a scandal, especially one that played out in his own drawing room. Genevieve curtsied low, wincing as her stiff, bruised muscles protested, but she rose gracefully. "Your Royal Highness," she said, presenting the book with both hands, "I present to you the irrefutable proof of the legitimacy of Leopold Sterling, true-born son of the Duke of Westcott, and his late wife, Marguerite Sterling." The prince signalled for his equerry to bring the book to him. The room held its breath. The only sound was the rustle of parchment as the prince turned the damp, mould-scented pages. He adjusted his spectacles, peering at the entry Genevieve had marked with a ribbon. He read it once. He read it twice. Then he looked up, his heavy face breaking into a satisfied, cruel smirk. He looked at Benedict, who was now trembling visibly. "It appears to be an order," the prince declared, his voice booming. "The seal is authentic. The entry is clear. The boy is legitimate." The declaration broke the dam. The room erupted into a frenzy of whispers and exclamations. The tide of opinion, so easily manipulated, turned instantly against Benedict. He was no longer the grieving friend. He was the villain who had tried to usurp an orphan's birthright. Benedict backed away, his eyes darting to the exits like a trapped rat. "It's a forgery!" he cried, desperate and pathetic. "They forged it. Casey is mad, I tell you. Don't listen to him." Casey moved then. Despite his injury and exhaustion, he crossed the distance to Benedict with the speed of a predator. He did not draw a weapon. He simply stood before him, blocking his path, looming over him like a dark tower of judgment. "You sent men to ambush us on a mountain pass," Casey said, his voice low, intimate, terrifying. Only those closest could hear the lethal promise in his tone. "You tried to kill me. You tried to widow my wife. You tried to orphan my son. I was desperate," Benedict whimpered, sweat beading on his forehead, his charm dissolving into cowardice. "My debts. Casey, please. We were friends once. Think of our history. Think of the old days." "We were never friends," Casey replied coldly, his eyes dead. "You were a parasite, and I was the host. But that ends tonight." Casey leaned in closer, his dark eyes boring into Benedict's soul. "I could challenge you. I could kill you right here, and the law would call it justice. But you are not worth the stain on my boots." He grabbed Benedict by the lapels of his fine coat, bunching the expensive fabric in his fist, and shoved him backward with contempt. Benedict stumbled, nearly falling, his dignity shattered. "If you ever come near my family again," Casey snarled, baring his teeth, "if you ever speak my wife's name, or my son's name, I will not send a second to arrange a meeting at dawn. I will simply hunt you down and tear you apart with my bare hands. Do you understand?" Benedict nodded rapidly, tears of fear leaking from his eyes. He understood perfectly. Get out, Casey commanded. Benedict scrambled backward, turning and fleeing the ballroom. He ran past the sneering faces of the ton, past the women he had charmed and the men he had gambled with. He ran out into the night, a ruined man, his reputation incinerated, his future destroyed. Casey watched him go, his chest heaving. The adrenaline that had sustained him for days began to drain away, leaving him dizzy. The room swayed around him. He felt a hand on his good arm, a small, strong hand. "I have you," Genevieve whispered, stepping to his side to support his weight. Casey looked down at her. The anger vanished from his face, replaced by an exhaustion so profound it looked painful, but beneath it was a look of awe. "You did it," he murmured. "You saved us." "We saved us," she corrected gently. "Home?" he asked, the word sounding like a prayer. "Home," she agreed. They turned and walked out of the ballroom together. They did not wait for the prince's dismissal. They did not stop to accept the fawning apologies of the crowd. The Duke and Duchess of Westcott walked out into the cool London night, leaving the glitter and the lies behind them, ready to begin the life they had fought for. And that is the story of Lady Genevieve and the Duke of Westcott. What started as a brutal heartbreak in a hallway became a fight for survival, identity, and a love that defied the odds. It's a reminder that sometimes the worst thing that happens to us is actually the catalyst for the best. Genevieve didn't just find a husband, she found her own strength. If you enjoyed this saga of betrayal and redemption, please hit that like button. It really helps the channel. Don't forget to subscribe and ring the bell so you don't miss our next historical deep dive. What do you think? Would you have forgiven Benedict? Or did he get what he deserved? Let me know in the comments below. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next story.